It's great to be here. Before I begin, I'd like to thank Assam for having put this on, and I would especially like to thank Farhad Mamadov, Elnur Aslanov, and Javid Veliev for having taken care of all these logistical elements. I think that in terms of the security issues here, what I would really like to do today is to highlight some fundamental shifts that are taking place within the United States that I think will have direct bearing on this. I'd like to look at the U.S. policy in the Black Sea, South Caucasus since the Cold War, but with particular interest paid towards a return and perhaps a cyclical element in U.S. isolationist, interventionist cycles, which may take us in another direction. Going back, we see the strategic relationship or the strategic involvement of the United States in the Black Sea is really a relatively new one, given the history of the region. The U.S. really never was involved until the post-World War II era, or cognizant in any major way of the Black Sea, other than to have commercial interests. So strategic assets were basically not there. After World War II, however, with the Sixth Fleet, periodically the U.S. would show the flag. It was not bound by the treaties that had been signed in earlier decades and times. And essentially the Black Sea and the U.S. strategic assets were kept in the Mediterranean, periodically running a ship up into the Black Sea simply to show the force. This is done largely at that time in support of the Turkish Republic. From basically a strategic point of view, it was to reinforce Turkey and the opening of the international aspects of the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles. To be sure, we did have strategic capacities in that area. Without the fleet, we still had air bases in Turkey as part of NATO, and that provided considerable backbone. It's after the breakup of the Soviet Union, few Americans in or out of government had anything other than a partial understanding of the region. We had typically looked at this as one Soviet Union, and the different divisions within that area were unappreciated to a very large extent. In particular, the South Caucasus and Azerbaijan. In all fairness, from the United States point of view, this study of this history is not high on the priority. As Ahmet Davutoglu has said before, the United States is a continental power, and the underlying reality to that is that we tend to be very self-referential. The world as we know it often ends at the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Canadian border, and the Mexican border, and what happens outside is often very poorly understood, especially by the American public. However, this general lack of knowledge and interest in the American populace is not something that's mirrored in those who are charged with the formulation of American foreign policy, as well as the private sector groups who have interests in these regions. The Black Sea and the countries that border it are of considerable interest to these two latter groups. This interest clearly was raised after December of 1991 with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, an event that took the Department of State by surprise. And I think that a lot of these tectonic movements were not anticipated. And clearly the emergence of Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan were things that caused a good deal of shifting and rethinking within the Department of State, no matter what they would say, and perhaps they'd had some sort of intelligence of things potentially happening, but they were usually a little bit on the slow side. As issues of security supplanted those of the Cold War security, energy security, I should say, the U.S. began to focus on a mix of military and private sector concerns. While the first decade of the 21st century brought renewed military deployments in Iraq and also the invasion of Afghanistan, the Black Sea region remained the domain of private sector initiatives. We just were occupied elsewhere. At the same time, the participation of Georgia and Azerbaijan in the Afghan conflict helped to keep the State Department and others' eye on these countries. So it's a double-edged sword here. Further attention to the U.S. and NATO was focused on the region at the time of the involvement of the conflict and the conflict negotiations and hopefully resolutions between Russia and Georgia following the war in Georgia and Abkhazia. Today, the current regional views show signs of a potentially dramatic change. These roots lie in the shift in U.S. views and presence in the region. Two outcomes and a prediction can be found here. One, the U.S. has largely pulled out of Iraq. Ground troops are long gone. That reality. Two, the U.S. is actively involved in the engagement and engaged in the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Note well that this is a controlled evacuation of assets with little confidence that the situation will be stable after the withdrawal. Three, it's unlikely, given current circumstances, that Iran, after the U.S. withdrawal from both areas, will really have an opportunity to benefit, and I can get back into that later. From a longer perspective, the U.S. now seems to be following a longer historical internal cycle, one that's oscillated between an inward-looking approach, a nativist approach, we look within our borders, to a more foreign policy-oriented approach, looking out for engagement in the greater world. They've run in cycles before. This is not something that's new to the United States, and it's very important that people understand this mentality. During World War I, we went out into the world, we got engaged for a brief time, we came back. Things changed substantially with World War II, which was followed on by Korea, which was followed on by Vietnam. That period, we were engaged in a major way. Post-Vietnam, we retrenched. And by this retrenchment lasted really until 9/11, which came as a tremendous shock to most of Washington. To be sure, there were people who understood this within the intelligence agencies, but if you're looking at the other branches of government, which are key to formulating these policies, and they have to go through Congress, they were way behind the curve. This came as an entire shock, and the reaction to that is well known. I think that given the current down cycle in terms of engagement in the outside of the United States borders, we'll see that this formulation will be far less unilateral in the coming decades, and I'll get to that. A hint of this might come, well, actually, a hint of this might come as recently as the day before yesterday. As Obama followed up a meeting with the Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan on the Syrian crisis, saying that following the alleged chemical attacks in Syria, the U.S. reserved the right to take steps in the recent attack, but they would not be unilateral. I think this is one of the most clear signals of U.S. policy, not only in Syria, but elsewhere in the Black Sea region. This is a transformative declaration of sorts. Maybe he didn't intend to do it, but I think it underlies the shift in American policy. If one reads between the lines, this not only marks a change in U.S. policy with respect to Turkey, but it also should send a signal to Israel as well. This is perhaps the clearest declaration of the shift in policy from acting as the initiator of policy to a more collaborative mode. There's little doubt that the future U.S. activity in the Black Sea and South Caucasus will follow a similar template, and that might serve to shift U.S. priorities in the South Caucasus in an effort to bring policies more in line with Turkey. Clearly, this will entail considerable domestic discussion. Moving a bit further east and south, a new formulated partnership, if extended beyond Turkey's borders, may well serve to rewrite U.S. policy towards Iran. With the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the real burden of the return of the Taliban will fall not only on the Afghans, but on the Iranians as well. If I was living in Herat, I would be very concerned, as if I was living in Pakistan as well. Given the sharp political divisions in Iran, there may be an opportunity for Turkey to take the lead in the long-term process of rapprochement, leading that isolation to re-engagement. And Turkey, again, as well, will play a large portion of the negotiations that the Americans will involve with in the Caucasus and the Black Sea. At this stage, I'd like to introduce a recent development whose repercussions curiously seem to be ignored by regional actors, especially in the Persian Gulf. This may seem a little off topic, but it is not. This is the recent and rapid development of domestic energy supplies in the United States, namely the process of fracking. They call it fracking for both gas and oil. There has been an enormous unlocking of supplies. It now appears likely, in fact, it's almost definite, that the U.S. will be energy independent within 4 years. Now, as American foreign policy has been concerned primarily with the Gulf and with its relations in the Gulf with energy independence and the supply lines, this is a game changer. This is not a fantasy, I assure you. It's going to happen. Given the prospects of energy independence, coupled with the place in the down cycle in force projection, the United States will certainly take a hard look at reducing its presence in the PG. At minimum, an overall shift will certainly reduce the current presence in an effort to bolster the Pacific Fleet in order to counter the Chinese Navy. However, this does not apply, I believe, to the Black Sea and the South Caucasus. This is a different venue. Taken as a whole, however, these recent events point to a U.S. looking to redeploy and reduce its military assets and footprints from the Med to the Eastern Pacific. That's the naval assets. It will also shift from heavy weapons platforms to next-generation systems, assuming a relatively greater role in logistics and reconnaissance and deferring some of the other things to its partners. We already are in an era of smart systems, and this will only hasten it. Energy independence will also make it easy. Where does this leave us? Most probably, it means the U.S. policy will rely on strategic regional partnerships for security issues. It will also make use of such soft power elements as trade, cultural exchange, educational opportunities whenever possible. Most importantly, it will involve itself in foreign interventions only as a partner and only as a lead partner in cases where the U.S. itself is directly at risk. It's hoped that none of these forms of intervention will be necessary. To sum up, I think that if we're looking at the relationship of the United States with actors in the Black Sea and the South Caucasus, we need to keep in mind that the concerns of the U.S. Have been shifted away more towards a domestic agenda, which is a historical, long-standing historical, cyclical element. But the second thing, and this is where the real opportunities come in, is in partnerships. And I would look for partnerships not only with Turkey, but with Azerbaijan, other countries in the region, and to do a much more of a way of equal partners, with the United States being slightly a little bit higher in terms of the logistical and the capacities to engage there. So